A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone tuning in, and welcome to a special edition, 50th edition of the Voices of Sustainability virtual fireside chat series. Today, we're going to be shining a spotlight on the vital connection between clean water access and sustainable development across Africa. As we know, millions of people still struggle with reliable and safe water, and the consequences ripple through communities and economies, undermining human dignity, health, and advancement. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist specializing in water and also the founder of Atlantean Media, a communication agency. And I'm also proud to be joining the Zayed Sustainability Prize Selection Committee in the water category. And joining me here today are two other newly appointed members of the Water Prize Selection Committee. Both guests bring a wealth of experience and leadership in advancing water and sanitation solutions across diverse regions. Before we start, a very quick note about the Zayed Sustainability Prize. It was established in 2008 as a UAE's pioneering global award, recognizing sustainable, innovative, and humanitarian solutions. In the 17 years, the prize has reached over 400 million people worldwide through impactful solutions in health, food, energy, water, which we're talking about today, climate action, and global high schools. So now I'd like to introduce our two esteemed guests. We have Natasha Ramkirpal, who is a water security strategist and executive committee board member of the Manufacturing Circle. Natasha, welcome. And also Sareen Malik, who is the Vice Chair of Sanitation and Water for All. Sareen, good to connect. So we're delighted to have an amazing panel of speakers, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the insights. So to get going, I'd like to throw a question to both of you, because I think Africa's water crises are often framed as problems of infrastructure. And in your experience, can you talk about some of the overlooked barriers aside from infrastructure, perhaps governance and policy, social norms, or competing land use? And how do you think they sort of stand in the way of equitable distribution of water? Why don't we start with Sareen on this, please?
Thank you, Tom, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today and to be part of this great panel for the prize. So, all right, Africa. Why Africa, or why the focus on Africa? So just get some facts in there as well, some numbers, just to put everything in context. So out of the 7.7 billion on this planet, 5.5 out of 186 countries face water insecurity. About 1.7 billion actually are on the African continent, and more than half than that do not have access to safe water and sanitation. Now, Africa being in the situation that it is, of course, whether conflict, whether poverty, all the issues that we're generally known for, Tom. The thing is that Africa's economy, the backbone of Africa's economy is actually water. So, because we have a rain-fed agriculture, our industries, you name it, anything where you find those SDGs, all 17 of them, water is generally at the center. And this is just not for Africa, this is really for the whole world. All the way up to partnerships, which is something that we'll probably discuss later on in the podcast. So just East Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, I think we're at about 400 million that don't have access to safe water and sanitation. And it's, of course, having to do with resources, but also the uneven distribution of the water sources on the continent, the issues of governance, the issues of pollution, the issues of missing policies that we are trying to address. The continent is actually doing really well, I must say, in terms of trying to figure out, the water crisis, which is also, Tom, a governance crisis generally.
Sareen, thank you. I love your phrase there, the backbone of the economy is water, because I think you quite rightly said, although there are SDGs focused on water and sanitation, if you actually look at how SDGs on water and sanitation are interlinked with every other SDG, it's literally the backbone of the economy, but of business, of health, of education, of everything, right? So, yeah, Sareen, thanks so much for the context and the reminder on those quite startling statistics on the lack of access to water and sanitation. Great stuff. Natasha, if you want to kind of then comment on how you kind of see the crisis beyond the framing of infrastructure when it comes to water and sanitation in Africa.
Yeah, and thanks again, Tom, for being a part of this, for allowing me to be part of this podcast. Really great opportunity, and looking forward to the rest of this discussion. I think framing Africa's water crises purely as infrastructure gaps is a convenient but incomplete narrative. While infrastructure is undeniably critical, the real barriers lie upstream in governance, institutional fragmentation, and the political economy of water. One of the most overlooked issues is institutional incoherence. Water responsibilities are often split across multiple ministries, regulators, and utilities, with poor coordination and accountability. This leads to disjointed planning, overlapping mandates, and misaligned investment priorities, especially where urban industrial expansion competes with rural and ecological water needs, like Sareen mentioned in Africa. Secondly, governance systems often fail to reflect water's true value, both economically and culturally, which is very relevant for the global South context. Many water allocation frameworks are outdated, privileging historical entitlements or extractive industries, while marginalizing communities who depend on informal water access. This institutional bias creates structural inequities in water distribution, even when the infrastructure exists. We also underestimate the impact of land use change, agricultural intensification, and encroachment into recharge zones. Water security is deeply tied to land governance, yet catchment protection and land water integration remain weak across much of the continent. And finally, there is a technocratic bias in how solutions are designed. Many interventions ignore local knowledge, no, sorry, Many interventions ignore local knowledge, gender dynamics, and social norms around water access and control. In my experience, the failure to center community agency and lived experience in water management perpetuates exclusion and undermines long-term resilience. For Africa to move from scarcity to security, we need more than pipes and pumps. We need platforms for transparent governance, equitable allocation, and participatory decision making that recognizes water as a public good, not just a utility input.
Amazing. Natasha, thanks so much. You referenced those infrastructure gaps as quite a convenient narrative that's often heard about. But I like that phrase, institutional incoherence, and really how that leads to disjointed planning. And also the importance of community agency to really have the voice of diverse communities and make sure they have a voice at the table when it comes to these planning decisions. So thank you very much. Sareen, so on that very topic then of input and insight and community agency, the next thing I want to talk about is community trust and behavioural change, and why, quite rightly, as Natasha said, they are critical in local interventions. So can you share perhaps an example where you see how civil society engagement and grassroots participation have really helped to ensure the success and impact of water security or a sanitation project? And from that, as a kind of separate part, what lessons can international actors draw from those experiences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just in terms of going back a bit on what has been said, yes, some of these issues are there. Those issues are there, the issues of institutional fragmentation and the governance and the policy. But when you look at Africa compared to other southern regions, it's actually pretty advanced on, on its progress towards institutionalization, towards regulation, towards, policies and laws. Now, when it comes to the community management, I'm of the school of thought that this is broader than just the water sector and the community. This speaks to much bigger frameworks, such as the constitution of a country, the democratic governance of a country, whether there's a public participation act in place in a particular country, whether there are processes and systems that allow communities to actually actively engage. Now, the role of civil society, yes, is to make sure that that happens and to hold our governments actually accountable for the progressive realization to the right to water and sanitation. Now, when it comes to community, all too often there's this thinking that, more power to the community. No, more power to the state and to the government and to the systems and to the processes. For example, we hear a lot of investment being done in urban water utilities. Okay, then we have the NGOs and everybody else drilling boreholes left, right, and center and doing whatever they want at the community level, and these things are not being sustainable. The push would be a rural water utility to be put in place. So we have to push towards more institutionalization. Now, the continent actually has quite a bit in terms of regulation, for example, where you have these umbrella organizations or these regional entities on the continent. And this is why I was saying that Africa, there is a move towards ensuring that, we're able to meet Agenda 2063, the vision of Agenda 2063, that whether through additional financing, there's this new platform known as the African Investment Program that seeks to mobilize a number of resources. We have the African Ministerial Council on Water that is leading on the Africa Water Vision Policy post 2025. So there's quite a bit. And yes, Natasha is right. There is these issues of, lack of coordination, lack of this. But I do want to say that the continent is actually working on, trying to sort this out and bringing the various sector stakeholders on board. But in terms of the community and civil society, our role really, and I hate using this word, this sentence, is to make the invisible visible, making sure that, every voice is represented, not people. People are represented by the state. Civil society represents voice. Those are very two different elements that tend to blur at some point. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sareen. So it's a balance between making sure enough power is to the state as well as the individual level, right? So there's not it's not too one-sided. But if we can just go back to the question, can you share any examples then of how civil society engagement, have helped to ensure the impact of project security? I think you've set up the context behind the why the power and the investment is important to be distributed. But can you share any examples?
Well, of course. I mean, some of the more complex issues, a country like Mali, for example, where civil society spearheaded the enshrinement of the right to water and sanitation in the constitution. That is huge. Mm-hmm. Kenya, where you had the civil society networks push for that very right, and of course influence how the Water Act and legislation as well as ancillary legislation was actually going to better serve the people. Where you do have, yes, civil society that have plugged a gap in terms of hard to reach areas or supporting government. But you see, there's a limit, Tom. There's a limit in the sense that I'll go really granular. You will go and dig a borehole somewhere, stick a community management, whatever, over there. Within 3 months, 4 months, I can assure you that water point is going to be non-functional. Everybody's but all disappeared. And I have seen it where women will just go back to the dirty water pan to go and fetch water. Now, this is what I'm saying. This has to go a bit further. There has to be a bit more in terms of, the management and the governance of, the entirety of it. And this civil society, yes, has been absolutely successful. For example, under the FWA initiative, we have what we call these heads of state initiatives, where we get the president or the head of state to sign a presidential compact, prioritize water. Natasha is right. Yes, there is a problem of prioritization of water on the continent. But then it is because of other competing interests, whether roads, whether infrastructure, whether other things. And our role as civil society, which we are working on, make sure that these, the primary or the heads of state in countries acknowledge that water is at the center of your economic development. Number two, acknowledge that if 50% of your population is struggling, and by this I mean women and girls, because they have to go fetch water on a daily basis, you are undermining even the future of the country because she's not in school. You know, I find
Right.
it always amusing when, you know, people talk about building schools, but I'm like, is there a water line to follow that school? Have you checked whether the girls are in school or fetching water, which of course has, you know, terrible repercussion. So, you
Mm.
know, I mean, there's a myriad of information out there on the work we do, but we do have civil society that actually influenced Southern Sudan, Zambia, Ghana, presidents to sign these presidential compacts, bringing, you know, water really at the highest level to compete with other agenda items that you may find, you know, in the country. Basically, I'm trying
So,
to say,
sorry,
you know,
thanks.
we still have our raison d'être.
Very good. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's going beyond the single borehole projects with a risk of becoming non-functional and looking at capacity building to ensure that where there are, you mentioned there, the role of civil society to plug gaps, but they are solutions that are sustainable and long-term and not within 2 to 3 months that they kind of break down. And then, as you rightly said, the role of fetching water falls to often young girls, and it takes them out of education. So this links back to the discussion we had around the link within the SDGs of water and education. But Natasha, let's bring you back in here because you've worked on water security across 11 different African nations. So can you talk to us about this, the potential of perhaps cross-sector alliances to really advance responsible water use within manufacturing? How do you navigate competing interests between business and community water needs as well?
Yeah, and I think that this context of Africa, working in Africa, is absolutely the most amazing, rewarding thing that you could do in your career. It's incredibly powerful to be able to work in this environment. But cross-sector alliances are not just helpful when it comes to working in Africa and when it comes to water, they're actually essential. And in the African context, where water stress intersects with climate variability, rapid urban development, and legacy infrastructure challenges, no single actor can achieve sustainable water outcomes in isolation. Responsible water use in manufacturing requires collaborative systems that align economic growth with social and environmental priorities. They have to be at the center of what you do and interwoven into the strategy of all your growth priorities and goals. The intersection between business and community water needs can present challenges if viewed in a purely binary way, particularly in areas where both rely on stressed or underdeveloped resources. In these situations, cross-sector partnerships provide a platform to develop integrated, inclusive solutions that balance operational continuity with broader social resilience. In my experience, the most impactful strategies are those that frame water as a shared risk and a shared responsibility. For example, investments in water reuse within manufacturing can significantly reduce pressure on municipal supplies, freeing up water for community use and buffering against supply disruptions. Similarly, advancing non-sewage sanitation technologies in areas that lack centralized infrastructure enables safe, decentralized solutions that improve public health and protect source water quality, which ultimately benefits both households and industry. These kind of innovations, when implemented through coordinated planning and stakeholder engagement, which is vital, illustrates how industrial leadership can be leveraged to generate co-benefits beyond the fence line. They also reflect a shift towards resilience-oriented water strategies that recognize the interdependence of all users within a catchment. And navigating potential trade-offs requires early engagement, data transparency, and alignment with national water policy goals. For example, South Africa's Department of Water and Sanitation has laid important foundations in this regard, particularly through the National Water Resource Strategy, which emphasizes demand-side management, inclusive governance, and fit-for-purpose solutions. Ultimately, the goal is not to prioritize one group over another, but to co-create pathways where community, water security, industrial resilience, and ecological sustainability are not in competition, but in convergence.
Natasha, thanks so much. We're going to come on to the kind of the role that corporations will play, but I think it's interesting that you touched on perhaps the need for shared risk and shared responsibility between different businesses, because I think businesses often have different commercial objectives. So it's not just shared risk, shared responsibility, but also shared metrics and shared frameworks with which you can measure, to monitor and improve their impact on water within the regions that they operate in. But we will come on to more on the role of corporations a little bit later on. So, Sareen, we're going to throw it back to you in terms of, we've talked about cross-sector alliances, but what about models of cross-sector learning and partnerships that you think are successful for scaling up successful water interventions? And how can you share some light on how you identify and transfer innovations from perhaps one context to another, so that we're not repeating the same mistakes and we can learn from these?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Well, homegrown, homemade, home designed type of innovation, or very contextualized innovation. What do I mean by that? You may have a technology that works really great in Germany or the Netherlands, for example, and you try and bring it here in the middle of nowhere, and again, it breaks down. The part can't be found, and there we are. We're back to square one. So I think it's really in terms of we've been talking a lot about the local knowledge informing the design of an innovation or something that could be replicated. And this is really critical in the way knowledge is actually, or the negotiation or the brokering of knowledge between the North and the South. Because for a long time, it has been Northern led, whereby now we're pushing more towards a stronger Southern input in terms of how some of these innovations or solutions are actually being designed and implemented. So we have seen this happening. There's another role that I have, which is I'm the co-president of CEWAS, which is the Center for Entrepreneurship for Water and Sanitation. So we've actually worked a lot with water entrepreneurs, female hygiene, sanitation, and it's amazing. We actually saw products and services that were really designed to cater for the needs on the ground, or products and services that may have come from the North and that were contextualized or retrofitted to the context. I'll give an example. This was really fascinating, Tom. So these ladies in the female health, hygiene, sanitation sector, they started with like a backpack, which had areas where women could put reusable sanitation products, and to help them, particularly in really remote areas.
Mm-hmm.
Then they saw that the girls at night, it was a bit complicated to go to the outside sanitation facility. So they added like this solar lighting panel to the backpack to allow the girls to actually, be able to do their homework, but at the same time be able to have lighting when they're actually going to the bathroom. Isn't that amazing? An association of two very separate things that came together. So I think this is what we're looking for, where you have, you have the human story on one side, which you really need, and that you must understand in depth. And then, of course, you may have now the service or the product or the innovation, and these two need to coalesce in a certain way that will adequately serve, those that are on the ground. But that was one of the most fascinating. It was simple, hard that enterprise had on the girls, and this is what I think the prize also. This is what we should be looking for. True impact. How did this actually impact the life of someone on the ground? Mainly girls and women who are the ones suffering.
It's a great example of contextual decentralized innovation,
Absolutely.
Right? And there's a great expression, necessity is the mother of invention. And there you've got a couple of innovations that have been brought together by the context and the challenge with which that community is facing. So, and as you quite rightly pointed out, what innovations might work and solve pain points in mainland European kind of context, are unlikely to maybe be fit for purpose in kind of sub-Saharan Africa. So it's a case of making sure that the right innovation, the right technology is being deployed accordingly. So great example. Thank you, Sareen. So Natasha, let's throw it back to you, because you talked a little bit about cross-sector alliances in businesses, but corporations, there's a huge responsibility to be stewards for water stewardship in managing and conserving water for the benefit of both communities and ecosystems. So in this regard, where have you seen the most significant challenges, breakthroughs in aligning corporate water use, particularly with community needs and climate resilience?
Yeah, it's a very powerful one, Tom. One of the recurring challenges that I've observed is that industrial water strategies often prioritize internal performance indicators, such as efficiency gains, reduced abstraction, or compliance improvements. These measures are important and necessary, but on their own, they may not fully respond to the broader systemic issues impacting community water access or ecosystem reliance. In regions where public infrastructure is under pressure or where climate variability is intensifying water stress, there is a growing need to ensure that corporate water initiatives are aligned with catchment level priorities, and also that they're inclusive of wider social and environmental dynamics. A recurring difficulty lies in aligning corporate water management practices with the realities of public service delivery. And this is very real in the African context, particularly where water infrastructure is aging or under-resourced. Businesses may develop private solutions, such as, like Sareen mentioned, boreholes or reuse systems, while the surrounding communities continue to face unreliable water access. And we can tell you all about the water shedding issues we've had in South Africa that talk to this. This divergence, while not always intentional, can contribute to perceptions of inequity if not addressed transparently and in alignment with local planning processes. On the other hand, some of the more encouraging developments I've seen comes from situations where companies recognize that long-term operational continuity depends on shared basin health and community stability. And in such cases, there is often a deliberate effort to engage with local authorities, support data sharing on source vulnerability, and align investment decisions with national water strategies with an emphasis on climate resilience, water reallocation, and integrated catchment management. Breakthroughs tend to occur not through isolated technical solutions, but rather through a shift in mindset. So when water is viewed as a shared and finite resource whose sustainability is interlinked across users, it's in these moments when stewardship is treated as both a risk response and a social obligation that there's an alignment between corporate, community, and climate needs. And this is when the impossible becomes possible.
Very good. Thank you, Natasha. Love that motivational quote at the end. The impossible becomes the possible. But I think it's important that for corporations to kind of think beyond their own fence, right? Beyond efficiencies in their own operations, and actually look at the different stakeholders and really understand the complexity of water linking to education and health beyond the kind of volumetric benefit of chasing gallons and liters and actually a replenishment exercise. So great perspective. So we say that again, Natasha, sorry.
But also food security, right?
And of course the link to agriculture and food security, no water, no food, right? It's the 70% of all water is used for agriculture. We can never underestimate the link between water security and food security.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Natasha mentioned on the corporate responsibility. So now at the global level, we've been running a program known as the Fair Water Footprint, the Glasgow Declaration. And this was being supported by FCDO, and Lord Zach Goldsmith is the one that gave it a push. Now, water stewardship is only an element of it. the question is in terms of what is fair. When we talk about balancing the interest between corporate, community, the country, did you know that it takes 265,000 liters of water for 1 kilogram of gold? Yep. Now I want you to imagine that in a water-starved country that has gold, that needs to extract it, and that still has to provide water for people. It's not a surprise, for example, that Rand Water is the largest water utility on the continent. About 7,000 liters to produce 1 gene. So these metrics, and we also have, the virtual price of water. And I think this is something also that Natasha spoke of, where the continent is moving towards the valuation of the water resource and the balancing of it. It's more than, it goes beyond stewardship, goes beyond the corporate responsibility, but really bringing sector stakeholders. For example, I do believe Unilever and Dana, all these big guys are actually signatories of the Fair Water Footprint Declaration in terms of trying to understand what is fair. You are extracting 265,000 liters of water for 1 kilogram of gold versus now, half of your population not having access to water and sanitation. So I think it's really gone in depth in terms of now talking about fair. What is fair in terms of how water is actually used and managed on the continent.
Very good. Thanks, Sareen, for the mention there of the fair water footprint. And you mentioned the quantity of water for gold, but I mean, I think all products and now nations around the world, including Africa, are going through this AI boom, thanks to the launch and the rise of ChatGPT and other large language models. So it's a case of all of this will be underpinned by data center infrastructure, which of course has an energy and a water footprint and demands. So there's interesting plays from the big tech and IT companies around the need to go beyond water stewardship, as you quite rightly said, Sareen. So great points there. So we are kind of coming to the end of our target time. So I'd like to kind of finish with a short, punchy answer from each of you, and that's to look ahead, to look into our crystal balls, and if you could perhaps change one policy, I'm only giving the option to change one, or investment priority to fast track integrated water outcomes in Africa, what would it be and why? So Natasha, let's start with you on that one.
So if I could change one investment or policy priority to accelerate integrated water outcomes in Africa, it would be to institutionalize cross-functional collaboration between sectors, ministries, and stakeholders involved in water-related decision-making. Because as we said, one of the most persistent barriers to water security on the continent is fragmentation between water and sanitation, between industrial and municipal supply systems, and between environmental protection and economic development agendas. These silos really lead to disconnected planning, duplicated efforts, and ultimately suboptimal outcomes for both communities and industries. I think what's missing is not technical capability or innovation. It's a coordinated platform for integrating water into broader development, infrastructure, and climate adaptation strategies. It means breaking down institutional boundaries and aligning mandates and budgets and creating spaces where public, private, and civil society actors can jointly plan and deliver water solutions with shared accountability.
So breaking boundaries or smashing silos, if I can summarize it into a very simplified expression there. Brilliant. So Sareen, bring us home then. And if you could choose one policy or investment priority change, what would it be and why?
The prioritization of women and girls. Tom. It's as simple as that.
I don't think you need, please continue.
Yeah, I know. It's just that if we're going to lift this continent out of its current situation, or if we're going to take this continent further, we need to prioritize women and girls and their access to water and sanitation. And the rest will fall into place. Yeah. Very
good and very powerful and very true. It links back nicely to the comments you mentioned there about the dependency on young girls to to fetch clean water. So, well, thank you so much, Natasha and Sareen. It's been a very short but fruitful and dynamic conversation, I think, looking at the connection between clean water access and sustainable development across Africa. We've covered a couple of things, and I think for me, it's the need to avoid that really easy go-to narrative around infrastructure gaps, because it's so much more complicated than that, as we know water is. So we've talked about cross-sector alliances to advance sustainable water use, and also the role of corporations and businesses and how they can play in the region. And I loved the case study, Sareen, about that local innovation and entrepreneurship linking water and light is absolutely brilliant. So I'm certainly looking forward to a continued discussion with the both of you during the Zayed Sustainability Prize Selection Committee in the coming months, and like to thank you both for your time.